Just to verify, we're all aware that the Republican cartel is going to commit a false flag attack. Like, we all know that regressives are going to orchestrate an act of domestic terrorism in order to blame that attack on left-wing scapegoats so that they can then use that attack as a pretense to send the American military into an American city as an occupying force. The Republican cartel has actually been trying to instigate an act of stochastic terrorism in the hopes that a left-wing agent would commit a legitimate act of violence against a government target on their own. That's what all the bluster and belligerence about showing Chicago why it's called the Department of War has been deliberately designed to do. But of course the regressives on the right vastly overestimate the mental instability of anyone even slightly left of center. They mistakenly believe that liberals, progressives, and leftists are as susceptible to stochastic terrorism triggers as the folks who identify as MAGA, which is obviously not the case. And when there is no legitimate act of violence from the left, the Republican cartel is simply going to stage one, like they did with the Brewer production. Because regressives are not now, nor have they ever been concerned with anyone's safety or freedom. They have only ever sought to impose their own totalitarian fascism on American citizens by any means necessary. I recorded that video a little before 8 o'clock in the morning on September 10th, and then I uploaded it here and scheduled it to post at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, I feel like I'm supposed to be delicate and diplomatic here, but my delicacy and my diplomacy ran out like a Montague and a Capulet, and most of us know how that story ended for them. I feel like I'm supposed to be empathetic and compassionate here, but my empathy is a finite resource and my compassion is a currency in short supply, and I will not be spending either of them on someone who spent his life delighting in the active harm he caused to the members of my community for profit, especially when he openly admitted that he personally couldn't stand the word empathy because he thought it was a made-up New Age term that does a lot of damage. I will not allow myself to indulge my schadenfreudistic compulsion to delight in the active harm that this individual experienced, lest I become like the monsters I work so hard to oppose. But I suppose it might be considered unfortunate by some that the Republican cartel selected him as the target of their false flag attack. But I'm sure he'll rest just a little bit easier in whichever circle of hell he spends eternity burning in, knowing that his death was engineered by his own regressive accomplices as an excuse to do all of the horrific things they were already planning to do. Wow, that was a pretty hateful statement, AHJ7102 says here, suggesting that I could have just said nothing. Which is, of course, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil, as the misattributed saying goes, or more correctly, that bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing. Charlie Kirk was an objectively bad person, and while the Republican cartel has seen to it that his end has been compassed, there are more equally bad people who are already using his end to justify and endorse further hatred and violence against the people that Charlie Kirk squandered his life encouraging hatred and violence toward. So I could have done nothing, but I chose not to, and I will always choose not to, because as anyone who has followed this account for any length of time will tell you, nothing has never been my style. Now rest assured that I don't actually believe that Charlie Kirk is burning in any circle of hell, despite the fact that his words and his actions absolutely warrant it, because there is no hell for him to burn in, nor a heaven to reject him, so his consciousness simply ceased to exist in the same way that everyone else's inevitably will. He has, as of 2 days ago, experienced the entirety of the consequences for the destructive energy that he infected this world with, and I regard him in the exact same way that he regarded all of the people whose lives he worked so hard to make a living hell. So if any of what I said there or here fits your definition of hateful, then unfollow me and pretend that I don't exist, just like you do with all of the people that have been hurt by regressive rhetoric and policy. For the uninitiated, a false flag operation is an act of violence or terrorism committed by a group in such a way that makes the incident look as though it was committed by another group, and it's most commonly done to create a pretext for retaliatory acts of violence, up to and including the declaration of a war, or in this case the justification for an ongoing war, against the group that was framed by the group that committed the act against itself. One particularly relevant example of what is generally regarded as a false flag operation was the arson committed at the Reichstag building in Berlin on February 27th of 1933, which the Third Reich blamed on communist agitators who they accused of waging war against the German political right. The incident was then used as a justification to issue the Reichstag fire decree that suspended certain articles of the German Constitution and made it permissible to restrict the rights of personal freedom, freedom of expression, including the freedom of the press, the freedom to organize and assemble, and the privacy of postal, telegraphic, and telephonic communications. Warrants for house searches, orders for confiscations, as well as restrictions on property were also made permissible beyond the legal limits otherwise prescribed. That decree was issued the day immediately following the fire, before any suspects had even been apprehended, in the same way that regressive mouthpiece Jesse Waters blamed liberals on Fox News for the Orem incident immediately after it happened, before any suspects had been identified or apprehended, and accused the left of waging a war against the American political right. The folks who identify as MAGA want me to remember that Charlie Kirk had children, but so did the parents of the victims of the Annunciation school shooting, and the Abundant Life Christian school shooting, and the Robb Elementary School shooting, and the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School massacre, and the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre, and the Columbine High School massacre, and the Cleveland Elementary School massacre. And unlike all of those victims, Charlie Kirk's children will still get to grow up, to discover that their father believed that empathy does a lot of damage, claiming instead to prefer the word sympathy without ever actually experiencing any of it. That it's a prudent deal to have a cost of some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment, or at least those who aren't the victims of gun violence can. And that public execution should be televised, with children as young as 12 being made to watch as an initiation. And yet if I were to say something outlandish, like say that Charlie Kirk's children have been officially initiated, I'd be accused of being heartless. Yes, Charlie Kirk, like so many terrible people, had children, and their lives were changed by a bullet, not ended by one, and so they will still get to grow up, to discover that their father was sacrificed by his own regressive accomplices in a false flag attack meant to be used as a pretext to justify the war that conservatives have been actively waging against everyone even mildly unlike them for the better part of a decade, and that it was the hateful, hurtful rhetoric that he so enthusiastically embraced and profited from that left them fatherless. At least he was brave enough to have tough conversations and allowed his beliefs to be challenged and accepted the possibility that one day he may be changed by another POV, says Binks Hijinks here of the expired Charlie Kirk, despite the fact that he and I both know that he knows that's intentionally untrue. Binks Hijinks knows full well that Charlie Kirk used the pretense of conversation and the spectacle of debate to promote a litany of hateful, hurtful rhetoric for profit, and never once did he even briefly consider changing any of his ideology based on anyone else's point of view. There was, simply put, too much money to be made from pandering to the sycophantic simpletons who identify as MAGA. Charlie Kirk was an openly racist, misogynistic, totalitarian extremist, and thousands upon thousands upon thousands of hours of video and audio recordings will exist in perpetuity within the electronic eternity of the internet, proving as much. This ludicrous notion of him as some sort of stalwart champion of free speech and expression is the absolute zenith of regressive revisionism, and it is exactly the tactic that conservatives use when they strove to rewrite the history of the Civil War as a matter of states' rights, rather than an attempt to preserve the inhuman institution of slavery because of the economic and political benefits it provided to slavers specifically and slave states in general. Charlie Kirk was martyred by his own like a sacrificial pawn so that he and his career could become this generation's lost cause. This was the whole quote, Tiny Boy II says here, having quoted Charlie Kirk's disingenuous criticism of the word empathy and claiming that it's a good quote being twisted. The problem, of course, is that it's not at all a good quote, and that it's not at all being twisted. It was twisted to begin with, because Kirk was nothing if not a grandmaster of word games and twisted linguistics. Charlie Kirk fancied himself a master debater, but his only real skill was tossing his own word salad. He was a perfect example of what a stupid man thinks a smart man sounds like. First, there is. Secondly, my comprehensive understanding of ethics and morality. And third, his hateful opinions and the destructive rhetoric he promoted. Now, if anyone's interested to know what questions these responses answer, feel free to click back on Green Alex W's original comment, which is a perfect example of the unrepentant regressive revisionism that Charlie Kirk's clannish cultists are engaging in now that his subscription to life has expired. They claim that he never hurt anybody and never said that it was okay to hurt anyone, which they know is deliberately dishonest, and they know that we know that it's deliberately dishonest, and they don't care that we know that they're being deliberately dishonest, because as their patron fiend once wrote, they follow the principle that when one lies, one should lie big and stick to it. They keep up their lies, even at the risk of looking ridiculous. And they certainly look ridiculous, because hours upon hours upon hours of video and audio recordings exist within the electronic eternity of the internet that prove that Charlie Kirk repeatedly said that it was not only okay to hurt people, but that hurting certain people should be encouraged. He publicly promoted murdering gay people, subjecting trans people to lobotomies, electroshock therapy, involuntary institutionalization, and lynching. And he built his entire career and personality on the premise of pandering to sycophantic simpletons by steadfastly dehumanizing anyone whose experience existed even mildly outside his parochial and elementary notions of biology, psychology, physiology, and sociology. But his clannish cultists do not care, because they're lying big and sticking to it. Having had some time to consider the events of last week and their aftermath through a more rational lens, and having heard certain liberal and progressive creators here go out of their way to declare that they don't condone what happened, and to condemn the use of violence as an equal and opposite reaction to violence, and having seen some of those same liberal and progressive creators go so far as to express their sympathies for Charlie Kirk, who squandered his life promoting hatred and harm against so many marginalized communities across this country, and for Erica Francevy, who is now exploiting her husband's expiration at the hands of another far-right Caucasian male extremist to incite the right's bigotries in order to further her husband's hideously hateful agenda against those same marginalized communities, despite the fact that those communities had nothing at all to do with her husband's expiration. I've reconsidered my position on the matter. I won't say that Kirk got what he deserved, but I will, without a grain of regret or remorse, say that he absolutely got what the far right decided he deserved. And I won't celebrate his expiration, but mostly because his expiration doesn't make the situation any better. He was perforated by one of his own regressive accomplices, and the rest of their regressive accomplices are already using his expiration as an excuse to escalate the war they've already been actively waging against everyone even mildly unlike them. So, no, I will not celebrate, because I know why the right did this to themselves, but I also won't pretend that I don't condone this right-on-right crime, or that I have some ethical objection to far-right Caucasian male extremists publicly perforating one another after the centuries of violence the right has committed against every marginalized community in this nation's blood-soaked history. Well, first off, I love how y'all can never actually have a conversation without mocking being rude or throwing little insults. It was so mature of you to mock my comment, whines tiny boy II here, because he seems to believe that he deserves maturity from me, though absolutely nothing about him or his nonsensical comments substantiates that belief. Personally, I love how regressives resort immediately to tone policing the moment that their own mockery, rudeness, and insults are met with equal and opposite mockery, rudeness, and insults. But he only proves here, once again, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that regressives are incapable of withstanding the frequencies of energy that they so gleefully excrete into the world. Anyways, doubling down on the ridiculous lie that Charlie Kirk valued compassion over empathy when he literally never said most of the words you lied about him saying, in particular the word compassion, which he didn't say a single time in the entire 178-minute episode in question, is a textbook example of lying big and sticking to it, just as your patron fiend of propaganda once described. Your insistence on keeping up your ridiculous lie reveals in no uncertain terms that betwixt maturity and mockery you are worthy only of the latter, and your inability to endure what you inflict on the world is no concern of mine. I am instead reminded of an old regressive axiom. Cry harder, snowflake. The coyote is always cut off, whines tiny boy II here, and that's because it's fake, you senseless NPC. The part being cut off is fake. 58% of the text that you pasted into my comment section is made up. This is the paragraph you posted, and everything after it does a lot of damage is fully fake. Charlie Kirk never said, I much prefer the word compassion. He never said, I much prefer the word sympathy. He never said empathy is where you try and feel someone's pain and sorrows as if they're your own. And he never said that compassion allows for understanding. Not once in the entire 178-minute episode did he even say the word compassion, much less claim to prefer it, and I know that you know that. What he actually said is this. Bill Clinton in the 1990s, it was all about empathy and sympathy. I can't stand the word empathy, actually. I think empathy is a made-up New Age term that it does a lot of damage, but it's very effective when it comes to politics. Sympathy I prefer more than empathy? That's a separate topic for a different time. End quote. This was the whole quote, and the video in which he said it is available on Rumble. You can go and watch it for yourself, just like I did. Except that you and your fellow regressives are intentionally spreading this fraudulent fiction and falsely attributing it to your favorite abrasive racist in a flagrant attempt at revisionism in order to reframe him as a political postmodern martyr, because that is what regressives do. You mangle language and you counterfeit history for your benefit, but in this case, the person who's going to stop you, ironically enough, is Charlie Kirk himself, or at least the electronic echo of him, reciting the words that he actually said in the video recordings of him actually saying them.